This is the Final Word Women's Ashes Daily. Jeff Lemon and Test Match special commentator Henry Moran from the Oval, where it was day 7 of the Women's Ashes series. It was the second T20 International. The show's brought to you by Westfield London and Westfield Stratford City. And you, Henry, are going to tell me about 40 overs of cricket in 30 seconds.
So, England won. That's the headline. They batted first. Danny Wyatt smashed it all over the shop, 76 for her. And in the end, England set a target of 187. Looked as though Australia were cruising. First wicket partnership worth 59. Then the wickets started tumbling. The pressure started building on Australia. Could England improbably get their first victory of the Women's Ashes? Well, they looked set for it until Elise Perry in the final over required 3 sixes. She couldn't hit the first one for 6. She did hit the final 2 of the innings for 6, just to remind everybody how good Australia are. But it's England that win, and they keep this Ashes series alive.
Ooh, I mean, it was as must-win can be. Australia 6 points from the first 2 games. They won the Test, they won the first T20, and if you get to 8 points, you retain the trophy when you've already got it, which Australia do. So if England are to have any hope of winning it, they need to beat Australia 5 times in a row. That's probably not likely, but in order to beat a team 5 times in a row, you've got to beat them the first of those times, and they've done that.
Well, you do, and you've got to try and break that duck. You've got to get over the line. And I've seen cracks in this Australian side in this series that I hadn't seen previously. I think Australia, as brilliant as they are beatable. England have shown that in tonight's game, and our feeling perhaps in the Women's T20 World Cup earlier this year that if England had got a chance to play Australia, they didn't because they lost in the semi-final, which ruled them out.
Stumbling block.
Well, it is. But had they got the chance, I think that England would have had a decent opportunity of beating Australia. They did beat them in this game, and they had to. Of course, not just in terms of the maths of winning the Women's Ashes, but also just a psychological block, having come so close in the previous 2 games. To lose this one, particularly given where they were, would have been a hammer blow.
It felt like one of those nights early on. It felt like one of those nights where things were not going for Australia, and you thought, well, maybe it's that sort of thing. In order to beat them, they need to have an off day, and the other team needs to play a really, really good game. Like you can play your best game, but if Australia are playing their best game, you won't beat them. It's got to be a little bit of both. But things weren't going for them. There was when Dunkley and Wyatt were opening up early on, there's the nick in the first over that goes for 4. There's the big top edge that falls safe. Then Dunkley's dropped. Talia McGrath, a simple catch, bizarrely straightforward catch that she puts down. There's a run out where the throw goes to the wrong end, and suddenly, it's all, and in between all this stuff, Wyatt's lacing boundaries 1 or 2 every over. She keeps picking one up, driving through backward point, through cover point in the way that she does. And suddenly, they're none for 57 off the first 40 balls by the time Dunkley gets out, and then they're 1 for 100 when that Siva Brunt's out there whacking it around. And everything's, the things that needed to fall for them have, and then the quality has started to show after that.
The one thing that did strike me in the England innings was I thought we'd seen this script before. We knew how it was going to play out when they started losing wickets. They lost 4 for 12, and you just thought, okay, right, we've seen this before. Good start, falls away, massively under par, and they lose the game. But that didn't happen. Sophie Ecclestone, Sarah Glenn scored the runs at the back end of the innings. Ultimately, proved entirely crucial, and they got there.
It swung back and forth so many times, right? Because it is 1 for 100, and then suddenly, like you say, it's for what is it? 5 for 19. They end up losing England, and it's Annabelle Sutherland who's crucial again. It comes in, short ball that takes the top edge, and then she bowls a brilliant cutter to Heather Knight that beats the outside edge of the bat, hits off stump. First ball duck. Heather Knight's 100th T20 International. Didn't quite. Well, things picked up in the second innings, I suppose, for Heather Knight. It's Capsy that she gets off the top edge, and then you've got Jones hitting down to Sutherland long on. So the over after she's taken the 2 wickets, she takes this spectacular diving catch running in off Talia McGrath, and then Danny Gibson with this weird sort of overhand shot to mid-off, and suddenly it's all falling apart. And then, like you say, it's Ecclestone and Glenn. They get together and they're like, no, okay, we're just going to keep pushing here. And there are a few weird moments. There are edges, there are buys, but there's also Ecclestone pinging that deep mid-wicket boundary 3 times, 4, 6, 4, as she goes out there. They're both out in the last over, but by that time they've done some damage. That was their highest score against Australia, I think, in T20s.
Yeah, and it was Australia's highest score batting in the second innings because they've never chased that many. They got very close to doing. They've never had to. I think for me, the thing that stood out from an England point of view that was really significant was that they've spoken about this brand of cricket, and I hate the fact, do we call it John Ball or Louis? I don't care, just play cricket how you want to play cricket and play it well. And they did play it well, but they played it in the way that they said they were going to, which is with aggression, confidence, and backing themselves. And so often you hear about sides saying, we're going to play a positive brand of cricket. words that should be banned as far as I'm concerned. But they did play with a positive brand of cricket, if you want to use that term.
Just the word brand is awful. Brand.
It's
I
a
mean, it makes you
sport.
think of cows, you like burning them with pokers, it makes you think of Russell brand, it makes you think of a whole range of things.
I'm just more thinking sort of, you know, where you might buy that nice jacket. That's a nice brand.
It's a nice brand. Yeah. And the other bit that stood out was Megan Shute, the queen of parsimony, you know, the one who doesn't give anything away. 25 runs off and over.
Oh, are we being overly hasty in saying that some of the much vaunted Australian fast bowling attack of 5-6 years ago maybe aren't quite what they were?
Well, I mean, I think you're allowed to have a bad night, but I think that might have been the most expensive Australian over in T20 internationals.
Oh, really?
I mean, there was a no ball 4, then there were 3 other boundaries, then there were 5 wides, a couple of 1s and 2s in there, and that's really what turns it. I mean, Danny Wyatt gets out just after that, uppercutting down to deep third, and you know, having blazed, like you said, 76 off 46 balls, was it, something like that, and then that last partnership. And then even then, I thought at that halfway mark, and there's a pretty partisan commentary box up here, everybody was so pessimistic. Every England supporter was like, well, obviously they're just going to run this down. And I was saying, well, it's 180, it's not nothing.
Yeah.
You've got to score them.
I think that there's a degree of scarring from the first, well, not just in general against Australia, but also the first Ashes T20 in 2022 at Adelaide Oval, where England hit 170 odd, and Australia chased it down 1 down.
Yeah.
And at the
In
midway
like
point,
14 overs or something.
and at the midway point of that game, there was like, okay, England are a different side coming into this Women's
Yeah.
Ashes, and suddenly it was like, okay, right.
Yeah.
And as you say, Australia, they had an off night, and I spoke to Elise Perry afterwards, and she said, look, the better side won. I'm not sure England were necessarily the much better side. I think perhaps that there were a few moments that went their way, and there were a few moments that Australia perhaps didn't perform at their maximum. Similarly, you could go back to the first T20 and the Test match and say there was maybe a few moments, decisions that didn't quite go England's way. That's sport, that's the way it works. What we have seen, though, which is really encouraging for the women's game, is that Australia haven't been entirely dominant. And I think that's really, and I love watching Australia because they're brilliant.
Yep.
I also like competitive sport.
And it was basically the same game. It was the same innings pretty much. So they get off to a flyer as well, the Australians, 59 off 37. Healy smacks a couple of 6s in an over off Siva Brunt, you know, way over the leg side, the second one, huge hit, like well into the seats. And, you know, big crowd here at the Oval. We'll come back to that as well. And then it's almost, it's a brilliant piece of bad cricket in that it's about 4 different bits of bad cricket, in that Beth Mooney hits what should be a catch to mid-off. Mid-off, Charlie Dean there needs to take 3 steps forward and just doesn't move, just stands there and waits for the ball to not quite reach her. Then sort of falls over, and then Mooney's decided to take the run because she's like, well, either I'll be caught and out, so it doesn't matter, or she'll drop it and I'll be able to get through for the single. So she takes the run and gets there comfortably, but Talia McGrath's watching the ball, not watching Mooney, turns around and realises Mooney's standing next to her and has to run to the other end. And then Dean's throw is wildly wide of the stumps. So it's 4 ordinary bits of cricket in a row, and Jones manages to tidy up and dive in and backhand the ball at the stumps and run out Talia McGrath. So she's out cheaply. And then, you know, they just start going through them. And by the point that Charlie Dean bowls Grace Harris, you know, after Gardner's been caught and bowled, they're 96 for 5. It's the 13th over, and they're in all sorts of trouble. Yeah. And then you've got the Elise Perry phantom edge, or, you know, the poltergeist edge.
That was a weird
the haunted DRS. Well, talk us through it.
So there was a sort of late cut through to the keeper. Interest immediately from Amy Jones and the bowler.
Yeah, but not convinced, like sort of, maybe.
Yeah, it was, you know.
It felt like let's use a review because we have 2.
Yeah, it was when someone offers you a drink late in the night and you're like, well, okay.
Yeah, I don't need it.
I don't need it, but let's go for it.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
And so
it's like when you've got a couple of drink vouchers left.
Yeah, and you think, well, I probably
like,
should.
Might as well. I don't want to waste them.
It would be a shame not to. So they went for it. And then the crowd, I was actually down in the crowd at the time just to sample a little bit of the atmosphere. They see on the big screen, there's the distinctive sharp flick, but it was just after the ball had passed it. But you know they have to sync it up manually.
Right.
That's what they always say, is they sync them up manually. And so at that point...
And often there's a little bit of a lag, but it shouldn't be that much.
Not that much. And there was always that sort of sense, well, okay, well, what else can it be? So it must be out. Perry saw it, was halfway back to the dressing room, and then umpire Sue Redfern announces on the PA saying from the TV box, no clear gap between bat and ball, come back. And she nearly wins the game. Yeah,
and Perry doesn't know, she's got no idea whether she's hit it or not. No. We saw her coming back to the middle and sort of talking to the umpires saying, like, I didn't feel any edge, but who knows? Because like you say, she just saw the spike and went, oh, well, I must be out, and started walking. But And then she sees it being looked at again and again and again. She's like, well, maybe I'm not out, maybe I'll just wait around. And she does get reprieved and she does bat through. But then Sutherland's 20 off 12 when she gets out. And then Georgia Wareham coming in. And I was just thinking, well, I've seen Wareham do this before in the Big Bash. I've seen Wareham do 50 off 20 balls in the Big Bash before. She's a hitter. And she takes a little while to get in, and then she finds her range.
She went 4-6-6, and Alex Hartley in the Test match special commentary box next to me suddenly went from very relaxed to very not relaxed.
They needed 50 off 18 balls at that point, and then she takes 19 off the over, off the third last over, and suddenly it's like, well, 31 off 2, that's doable.
Yeah.
And then Lauren Bell bowls a really good second last over, slower balls, that keeps him to a single, a brace, a single, and then a back of the hand slower ball that Wareham misses and gets bowled. So even though Jonathan comes out and hits a 4 and a 2, they still need 20 off the last over, which, it's possible, but with Eccleston bowling, you shouldn't get there.
Yeah, but you shouldn't get there.
They kind of nearly
did. They very, very nearly did. And, England have the trump card in Sophie Eccleston, who is the world's best. I think that's widely accepted. But one
tactical blue, first ball of the over, Perry takes, so Eccleston bowls her first 2 balls really, really well. She sort of bowls a bit flatter and a bit quicker, so Perry's coming down the wicket and can't get to the pitch of it. And then she slows it up and bowls shorter and wider to Jonathan, who's going back, should have gone back to that ball, but ends up coming forward to it and hitting it, not timing a shot and hitting a catch. So good bowling to start with, but if she doesn't take that single first ball, I mean, surely Perry's more likely. Like, Jonathan's a fine player, but she would have had to hit 5 4s off 5 balls to win that match. She's not really a 6 hitter. You needed 6s at that point.
And fresh into the wicket as well. Yeah. I think the only thing that is worth pointing out about that final over in terms of the scorecard is how often do you see it in run chases where it becomes mathematically impossible and suddenly the bowler relaxes, the delivery isn't quite as good, the intensity is gone from the game. And so you do see 6s hit. I mean,
they're just trying to put it there. They're just concentrating on don't bowl a no ball, don't bowl a wide. So doesn't matter.
I'm not quite sure it's necessarily, she hit 2 6s when it could easily have been 3 6s. It was 2 6s after a good ball previously.
Sure.
That Perry says was in the slot and should have gone, but I'm not quite sure.
3 6s from 5 balls is a bit easier than 3 6s from 3 balls.
Absolutely. And ultimately, Australia came very close because they bat so deep and they're such a good side.
Yeah, so they end up falling short by 3 runs. The Australians keeps the series alive at 6-2 on points. There are, we've got 1 more T20 and 3 ODIs to play. That brings us to the Final Word Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame, where we pick our most final word moments of the day. It's brought to you by Westfield, London, Westfield, Stratford City. I was out there at Stratford City last night playing some shuffleboard. Have you ever shuffleboarded before?
Yes, the sand on the table.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like curling in a pub.
It's like curling on a wooden table.
Yeah, it's lovely. Shuffleboard's great. I don't know where it's been hiding all my life, but I love it.
It's one of those things where when I went to the US for the first time and I was like, you just have this in bars? Like, you can just walk into a bar and play this amazing game of like touch and sort of skill and like sort of lawn bowling style.
Oh, it's lovely.
And you can switch it up. You can play, there's like a curling version you can play where you've got a circle, like a sort of bullseye thing, and then it's all about who can land the pucks in closest to the centre of the ring and that kind of thing. Yeah. So you can change up your shuffleboard.
It's a game that is, much like darts, massively affected by the amount of inebriation.
Yeah, and there's a window at about 1.5 where maybe you're better than when you started. Anyway, that's what I was spending my time doing out at Strat last night because there wasn't a cricket match on for the first time in weeks. But there was tonight. Okay, Hall of Fame. I've got to throw in the Danny Gibson forehand, the short ball that was above shoulder height that she kind of came over the top of and then just hit straight to mid off and just got it.
I loved it. It had a sort of certain, I know Wimbledon's on, I'm going to show what I can do.
Right.
Roger Federer.
Yeah.
Sort of vibe.
Like sort of there are those little clips of Nick Kyrgios playing a forward defensive with a tennis racket or something, and they'll go, trying out for the cricket team, are you? Good times. Yeah, that's how sports journalism works. Sophie Eccleston after the game putting her hat sort of up on top of her head like East 17.
Yeah.
Remember them? She was just walking around like that for a while.
Yeah.
That's her new thing, maybe.
Yeah, she's quite a hipster. She likes the Crocs and socks look.
Crocs and
as
socks.
well. Yeah, she's a fan of that. Can I throw in as a sort of slightly worthy one, how lovely it was to be at a game of cricket where 20,000 people were in.
Yeah, what was the final number tonight?
Well, I know that there was over 20,000 ticket sales plus over 1,500 hospitality, so that's big numbers.
Yeah,
and
maybe bigger than Edgbaston.
I think it was bigger than Edgbaston, and I was down there when the Elise Perry non-dismissal happened, and Well, on Sunday at Lord's, I was slightly dismayed by the endless chanting of "Same old Aussies always cheating." But when it came out this evening, it sort of felt like, these people here. It's a crowd that's really engaged with the sport they're watching.
Yep.
And there have been times, and let's be perfectly honest about it, there have been times watching the women's game in years gone by where it's been a real push to fill the grounds, and brilliant and necessary and absolutely part of the journey. But the crowd that I saw here tonight were massively engaged, massively partisan. And it's absolutely brilliant for the sport, and goodness me, this journey that we're seeing, and every development that we've seen is just so encouraging, and it's lovely to see.
And the noise with every, when Wareham was out, the eruption that went up there was incredible. I'd throw in, Sutherland's delivery to Bowlhead the night. It was like a sort of Pat Cummins version, the one that angles in and then decks away ever so slightly, hits the outside of the off stump, beautiful. And Sue Redfern, who had an interesting night in the box, because not only did she have the caught behind that maybe was or could have been or should have been, but she couldn't give it. There was no way she could give it, even though it was probably what it was, but it could have been a noise from something else. But she also had the Eccleston run out that was just on the line, and she had no way of being really able to, I thought was probably going to be given out, and then it was given not out, and it could have been either. And she didn't have an easy night on the tools.
She didn't, and I also like the way during the Eccleston run out where she just said, "That replay's giving me nothing." And there was a certain sense of weariness, just for God's sake, I need more.
Director, can you give me a side-by-side?
Yeah.
Side-by-side.
Not that one, you're giving me nothing.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that, and I thought it was a great game of cricket. I think that we've been treated to cross men's and women's Ashes series, 5 brilliant matches so far, and how lucky are we to be seeing such good close competition. And it might be Australia's women win every game for the rest of the series, but I don't think they'll win every game easily.
Long may it continue. We'll be at everything. We'll be Final Word Daily. We'll be at everything through the rest of both of the Ashes. So stay with us, Jeff Lemon and Henry Moran tonight. Thanks to TMS. And thanks to Westfield, London, Westfield, Stratford City for sponsoring the show. If you want to get involved with what we're doing, patreon.com/thefinalword is where to find us. And hang out on the internet, and otherwise, keep watching, keep listening. We'll be back at Leeds tomorrow. See ya.